I feel that both the liberal fairy tale Disneyland left and the hateful and bigoted far right both misrepresent the issue of immigration. The crisis of mass migration is something that we're not just wrangling with here in the United States. It's a question that rages all across Europe. The reality is that we are facing an international global crisis. North Africans are dying trying to get to the Mediterranean and get to Europe. Every day, scores of dead bodies are found along the U.S. border with Mexico. Many of those fleeing to Europe come from countries like Libya, Syria, and Iraq, where direct efforts by the United States and NATO have reduced countries to chaos. Direct military intervention, overthrowing the governments, arming terrorist groups, has made life in these countries unlivable. And Latin America is a similar story. In the 1980s, the United States was arming and training Contras. And it was no secret that these Contras who were going through Latin America killing communists and revolutionaries. It was no secret that these groups were involved in selling drugs. And now, with loads of US-made guns, the drug cartels have made life in Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico pretty unlivable. But the underlying issue behind the crisis of mass migration isn't just wars, destabilization, terrorism. The ultimate drive behind mass migration is economics. The computer revolution has made it far easier to produce commodities than ever before. There are now millions of people on the planet who have no place at the global assembly line. The entire working class is suffering because of advances in technology. Under this system, advances in technology lead to greater abundance. And under capitalism, greater abundance leads to greater poverty. I'm originally from Ohio. I recently went out to a part of Ohio called Clinton County, and I did a story about how, it's kind of ironic because it was Clinton County, but they voted 60-70% for Donald Trump. Well, while I was out there, I didn't see anyone in Clinton County under the age of 35. They've all moved on. There's not jobs. They've moved to places like New York City. They've moved out to California in order to get a decent life. When I listen to right-wing nationalists talk about immigration, they talk about it, it's like they think about it this way. They think that Juan or Jose is growing up in the rural parts of Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras, and he's in school, and the teacher says to him, "Juan, Jose, what do you want to be when you grow up?" He ponders for a moment. He says, "Well, could be a doctor, could be a lawyer, could go into real estate, but instead, I think I'm going to cross the border illegally, risk my life, come into the United States, start working for less than minimum wage, and be in terror of being deported the entire time." And he thinks over his options, makes a decision, crosses the border. When people are being kicked off their lands, when drug cartels are raining chaos and terror into people's lives, when ISIS is beheading people, when strong central governments collapse and countries are cast into chaos, sure, there are some people that surrender. But within the human species, and in all life on this planet, one thing that is always present is the will to survive. People do not want to be destroyed. People do not want to be crushed. Life seeks to preserve itself. And that's why a giant border wall isn't going to stop them. Fences aren't going to stop them. Doubling the border patrol isn't going to stop them. Tripling the border patrol isn't going to stop them. The drive behind the crisis of mass migration is an innate human will to survive. And this will is relentless and it never surrenders. I'll tell you this much. There are millions of Americans who love their children and they love their families, and I can guarantee you that if they were faced with the situations that are currently being faced by people in the Middle East or people in Central America, they would do the exact same kind of thing and take the exact same kind of risks to protect and win justice and win a good life for their families and the ones that they love. The immigrant phobia, this belief that migrants are the other, this is a primitive understanding of politics. But I must say that the way mainstream liberals talk about immigration is also disgusting. They don't recognize that what's happening is a crisis and a human catastrophe. They talk about the crisis of mass migration as if it's something to celebrate. I've heard they hold welcome the refugee parades. They say, this is the American dream, people coming to a new land. Don't you know, we're all a nation of immigrants. They say, these immigrants, they do the jobs that we won't do. They do the jobs that we won't do, as if there aren't millions of people in this country who are struggling and desperately need a good-paying job. Well, both of them ignore the reality of what's taking place. Both of them deny that we're facing a global humanitarian crisis spawned by the greed and the system of capitalism. So, often in debates like this, when the topic of immigration comes up, someone will make the points that I just made, and then the right-wing nationalists will say, okay, I get it. No one's saying these people have a good life. No one's saying that these people have it good. But what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to turn our country into an international homeless shelter? Are we just supposed to cry a river? Well, I'm here to offer a solution to the crisis of mass migration. Right now, the People's Republic of China has arguably the most brilliant anti-immigration policy ever invented. It's called the New Silk Road and the One Belt, One Road initiative. In places like Afghanistan, where people are so poor they cannot continue to live, where people are joining heroin gangs and terrorist groups, China has decided to start building high-speed trains and railroads and open up textile factories. In Bangladesh, a country plagued by poverty and suffering, China is in the process of now building airports, hospitals, highways. By stabilizing the parts of the world plagued by terrorism, drugs, and poverty, the Chinese are making it possible for people to remain in their own countries. They are securing their borders by creating an interconnected global economy where countries can trade with each other, not in a predatory way, but on an equal basis. And yes, China's brilliant anti-immigration policy has helped solve our own problem of mass migration a little bit. We have immigrants pouring into this country from Central America, from South America. We don't have many immigrants coming to this country from Nicaragua these days. Barely any immigrants are coming over the border from Nicaragua. Why is that? Because at this point, Nicaragua has a booming economy. In cooperation with China's One Belt, One Road initiative, Nicaragua is raising itself up. The Wall Street Journal reports that since 2005, poverty in Nicaragua has been reduced by 30%. The GDP has been increased by 36%. Working with China, Nicaragua is now building a canal that will serve as an alternative to the Panama Canal. The World Happiness Index, this is a study done by psychologists where they interview people in different countries, they say that there's been the highest increase of any country in happiness in 2016 was in Nicaragua. President Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo lead the Sandinista government with the slogan, Christianity, Socialism, and Solidarity, and with portraits of Karl Marx, Che Guevara, and Jesus Christ, along with trees of life inspired by the indigenous religions of the Aztecs and the Maya. A centrally planned economy is now being constructed in Nicaragua. Nicaragua is moving toward their own brand of Bolivarian socialism. And with jobs, housing, education, and infrastructure, Nicaraguans, unlike other people in different parts of Central America, they don't feel a need to leave their homes. I like to listen to debates on the internet. That's why I'm so happy to be here debating. In the lead up to the presidential election, there was a debate between a liberal and a conservative. There was Cenk Uygur and Ann Coulter. Have any folks seen that debate? It was kind of popular online. And during the debate, Ann Coulter is arguing about the issue of mass migration with Cenk Uygur, and she says, the majority of immigrant children from Central America have never seen a flushing toilet. Well, I don't dispute this claim. It is true that people living in rural parts of Mexico or the jungles of Peru or Central America don't often have running water or electricity or access to medical care or education. However, Ann Coulter says this and she expects us to just go, ooh, these disgusting people, I want to keep them out. She appeals to kind of a crass, classist arrogance and chauvinism. Coulter would have us believe that Central American folks are just naturally inferior to the white people of the United States and Western Europe. Well, she's wrong. The reason that conditions like this exist in Latin America and in many parts of the world is because Wall Street and London have an economic and global setup that is engineered specifically in order to keep people poor. Read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. When the British Empire conquered India, they had a vast textile industry in the country. Now, what did the British do? Did they say, oh, great, start making textile for us? No. What they did is they burned down all the textile mills and forced the people of India to start importing their cloth from Britain. The reason that the founders of this country staged the Boston Tea Party was because a giant multinational corporation called the East India Company was preventing us from developing our own tea manufacturers and importers. The domestic economy was being suppressed, and the Americans were being kept poor in order to make money for bankers in London. So we had a revolution, we kicked out the foreigners, and we developed our own economy. In the 1950s, Guatemala elected Jacobo Arbenz as the president for the same reason. He stood up for the country against United Fruit, the Wall Street food conglomerate. So what happened? He was toppled in a military coup. Guatemala has been drenched in poverty and war ever since. As recently as 2009, Honduras had a president named Manuel Zelaya who was trying to eliminate poverty and cooperate with China. He was toppled in a brutal military coup. Wall Street is currently waging an economic war against Venezuela, making it impossible for them to import food and basic consumer products like toilet paper. Venezuela has a socialist government, but more importantly, it has an independent state-controlled oil company that is exporting oil on the international markets, competing with Chevron, BP, Royal Dutch Shell, and ExxonMobil. Wall Street can't stand that and wants to topple the government of Venezuela. Whenever you see stable, independent governments that are trying to develop, you will see U.S. leaders trying to topple them and privately owned propaganda media calling them dictatorships and demonizing the government. Yet, wherever you see instability in the world, chaos and extreme poverty, you'll see Western leaders aligned with it, and Western bankers using it as a captive market. And why does the U.S. carry out this policy? Well, I would disagree with Invictus. As a leftist, I think the USA is not a democracy. We, the Americans, don't control our government. Our government is run by billionaires and bankers, and their wealth and their power comes from keeping the world poor and dependent. Strong, independent countries are competitors. They are threats to the global monopolists. And for a while, this worked out pretty well for Americans, right? They bombed Korea, they bombed Vietnam, they bombed Iraq, and we had the most booming economy in the world, right? We had a very good standard of living. But what they've done to Latin America, to the Middle East, to Asia and Africa, they are now doing to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, and Wisconsin, and so many other states. A deal with the devil is always broken, and there is no honor among thieves. And when it comes to solving these problems, there are indeed differences between the far right and the far left. We may decry the same circumstances, as you pointed out, but the solutions are different. On the right, you find a primitive appeal to instincts. They say that if you're a hammer, have you ever heard this before? It's if you're a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. Well, a certain mindset has been developed on the far right that says that police and prison guards seem to be the answer to all problems. Everything can be solved by just beating down and repressing people.